Okay, we're a bit late, so we're going to start right away. Today's panel, well, my name is Jesus Angel Gonzalez from the University of Cantabria. I'm part of the RE-West Research Group, and I'm chairing this session today. As you can see, Kalinda Eaton is not here. Okay, she wasn't able to make it. We're having Juan Antonio Sánchez instead. Juan Antonio was supposed to be speaking yesterday. He couldn't make it either, so we've managed to replace Kalinda. So we're going to start with Juan Antonio, and then we'll go on to Neil. So Juan Antonio Sánchez has been teaching at the University of Alcalá and Complutense in Madrid, and his field of studies, his field of research includes ethnic studies, cultural studies, Latino studies, and most of his research is focused on the Spanish presence in the United States. And today he's going to be talking about comics, okay? Western comics in the Hispanic tradition, specifically about Sergio Aragonés. So, the floor is yours.
Hello. All right. Okay. So yeah, basically I have been researching on Sergio Aragonés and work in the last months, basically during the last years. You know that Sergio Aragonés is one of the most famous cartoonists in the United States, and he happened to be born in Spain, in Castellón, although he grew up in Mexico. And he's famous for many works. He's associated to Mad Magazine, for example. But I wanted to examine his participation in the creation of a Western hero, okay, called LASH, who is one of the best-known American Western comic heroes in the U.S., right? Okay, and so the talk deals with this issue in the context, in the framework of the contribution of Spanish authors, right, to the development of Western comics, right? So first thing I wanted to say is that from my point of view, the popular imagination of the West that we all have stems not only from American fiction, but also from the graphic representation of artists of the second half of the 19th century, and the first half of the 20th century of the Old West. Okay, we all know that all these narratives, okay, or the representation of the West, okay, comes from the American fiction, right? Okay, dime novels, right, and also of some regionalist writers, realistic writers, right, and in the last decades of the 19th century, such as Bret Harte, okay, and this portrait, okay, of the West, okay, continued in movies in the first decades of the 20th century, right? Silent movies presenting the West were immensely popular in the U.S. Okay, but you also get the pictures, right? The images that some artists, right, created, right, such as Frederick Remington, Charles Russell. So there's kind of a combination of images, right? Okay, and narratives, okay, that conceptualizes, okay, this portrait, okay, that we have of the American West. So the American Old West. So it's only natural, right, that comics, right, approached, okay, this issue in the first decades of the 20th century. All right, okay. Regarding American fiction, one or two important authors that we need to take into account, right? Okay, that that portrayed, right, the West, okay, are Owen Wister, right, with his seminal work, The Virginian, and then also by Zane Grey, okay, the popular novel by Zane Grey, okay, that were continued in time with some other authors like such as Louis L'Amour and some authors also in other European countries such as Karl May in Germany, etc., etc. Now, when it comes to Western comics, right? The first time that they began to appear in the United States, okay, were associated to the syndication, right? Okay, of some comic strips that were published in American newspapers, right? Okay, so these original Western comic strips, okay, date back to the 1920s, right? The first ones appeared in the second half of the 1920s, dealing with characteristic figures, right? Historical figures of the West, such as Buffalo Bill, Wyatt Earp, etc., etc. For example, here you have an image of a comic strip, right, presenting the adventures, right, the fictional adventures of a young Buffalo Bill in 1927, and this is one of the first Western comic strips that appeared in the United States, right? So during the 20s and 30s, we get this presentation, this publication of comic strips in newspapers, okay, with historical figures turned into fictional characters and with the creation of new characters, such as the Lone Ranger, which became very famous from the 30s, in the 40s and 50s, okay, who appeared for the first time as part of the program of a radio station, and then it was the protagonist of many movies and also of comics, right? From 1938, right? There are many American characters, and this is something that it's interesting, that didn't become very popular in Europe, such as this one, Red Rider, and some characters who ended up being very important in comics of the West in Europe, didn't become very famous in the United States. Okay, so for example, Red Rider. Red Rider was extremely famous in the 30s and 40s in the US, right? Okay. In Spain, for example, he's virtually unknown. Okay. So, as I say, new Western heroes were created in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Some associated to the movies, okay, like Gene Autry, right? Hope Along Cassidy, who was usually performed in movies by William Boyd, and it was William Boyd who in his search of promoting himself, asked to be presented also in comics in the 40s, right? And in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, we have new Western heroes created, especially for the comics. Many of them with this name of Kid, like Kid Colt, Bringo Kid, Rawhide Kid, Two Guns Kid. Okay, many of them appeared in Marvel. Okay, Stan Lee, for example, was one of the authors that also worked in comics and created these characters. And dealing specifically with Hispanic comics, I think that it's important to highlight the fact that Americans, right, in the United States also created, okay, Spanish Western heroes, or Latino or Hispanic Western heroes, such as Zorro, okay, who appeared for the first time in the narrative The Curse of Capistrano, right? He was created by Johnson Macaulay, and he became more and more famous after the movie The Mark of Zorro, okay, starring Douglas Fairbanks, right? That came out, that was released in 1920, and then it was turned into comics, right? So we have like Spanish Western heroes created by Americans, right? We also have the Cisco Kid, for example, right? Okay, who first appeared in a short story by O. Henry, and then also appeared in movies, right, and in different narratives, and in comics, right? Okay, and we should point out that from 1951 to 1968, I think, okay, the comic artist, okay, who draw the comics of Cisco Kid was the Argentinian Jose Luis Salinas, right? Okay. Now, so what I wonder in this research was to what extent the contribution of Spanish Western comics was important or has helped to develop, okay, the genre in general in the United States or globally, right? Okay. There are also there have been authors who have written narratives, okay, stories, books, dealing with the West, right? The first Western, okay, is supposed to be written by a Spanish author. Is this one called Los Hijos del Desierto, written by Esteban Fernández y Hernández, right? But we have some other very well-known authors in Spain, such as Marcial Lafuente Estefanía, okay, who wrote hundreds, okay, of Westerns. And there are some other not as well-known, okay, authors born in Spain with this concentration, right? Okay, in Western fiction that may not be as well known, but they have written also thousands of books, right? And just Curtis Garland, okay, which is the pseudonym of Juan Gallardo, wrote hundreds and hundreds of Western novels, right? Okay. Other than the American tradition, okay, cultivated in the United States of American comics, I think worldwide we need to take into account two other very important traditions, right? One is the French school of Western comics, right? Okay, with such major works as Blueberry, okay, written by Jean Giraud, okay, better known as Moebius, and the writer Jean-Michel Chartier, and the French school, okay, and the Italian comics, right, with such well-known, especially in Italy, works as Tex Willer and Ken Parker, right? But I think we also need to take into account, right, the work of Spanish authors, right, Hispanic authors, right, and I think when we deal with this issue, with the contribution of Latino authors to the development of Western comics, we need to take into account the work of authors from 3 or 4 main countries, right? One is Mexico, okay? Number 2 would be Argentina. Number 3 would be Spain, okay? And number 4 would be the authors, okay, from Hispanic countries working in the United States, right? Okay, right? I mean, there are also Colombian Western comics, you know, and Brazilians and so on, right? But I think like the most influential ones come from these countries, right? Okay. So in Mexico, right, some comics. And I'm just giving like a brief overview because I mean of like the time span that I can use right in this presentation. In Mexico, some comics following the pattern of the Western narratives, okay. Were created especially in the 60s. There were some very famous ones, okay, such as Alma Grande and El Payo, and basically they follow the same formula of the Western comics, but they obviously have a Mexican touch. Right. Okay. For example, Alma Grande, the protagonist, the hero of Alma Grande, is a half-breed, and he's a Mexican and combination of a Mexican and a Yaqui Indian. Right. Okay. And the problem is that these Mexican comics didn't become very well known in the United States. They were just popular, right, in Mexico. But when we talk about Mexican Western comics or the work of Mexicans, right, in the evolution of Western comics, we also need to take into account the dedication, the work of Mexican authors in the United States, right? Mexican Americans, right? Argentina, right? Osterheld is an Argentinian author that became especially famous with such comics as El Eternauta, okay? But he also wrote Western comics, right? a very famous one was Sargento Kirk, okay? That he wrote together with Hugo Pratt, okay, who was the author of Corto Martels, right? ¿Cómo voy de tiempo? Fatal. Oh, all right. Okay, fine. Well, we don't have much time, but basically, there are in the 40s, 50s, and 60s there were very many Spanish authors who also worked in Western comics, such as Carlos Freixas, okay, Manuel Gago Garcia, who was the author of El Guerrero del Antifaz. El Coyote was very famous. He was a Western hero, very famous in Spain, and it was turned into comics by Francisco Batet. Carlos Jiménez, very famous for Paracuellos, who wrote Gringo, and Victor Mora, who's the author of Capitán Trueno, also worked in comics, right, together with Victor de la Fuente. Victor de la Fuente is a very well acknowledged author of Western comics from Spain, right? And I also wanted to talk about Antonio Hernández Palacios, whose Manos Kelly is also a very well known sample, okay, of Latino Western comics, right? Okay, and also authors coming from Spain and Latin America working in the United States, okay, such as Carreño, okay, and José Luis García López, who was a Spanish author who grew up in Argentina and is a very well-known comic artist, right? That drew, okay, the adventures of Jonah Hex, which happens to be one of the most famous Western heroes in Western comics, right? Okay, and finally, Sergio Aragonés, right? Sergio Aragonés, whose main character, right, in this field, right, is Bad LASH, right? Okay, so we all know Sergio Aragonés from Mad Magazine, right? Okay, and from such comics as Gru, right? But his role in the creation of Bad LASH is not as well known, right? Okay, and basically we don't know to what extent, okay, Sergio Aragonés was the only inventor or the only creator of this character, right? Carmine Infantino, who was the editorial director of DC Comics, and met with Sergio Aragonés, right? Okay, and apparently he had in mind, okay, the basic features of this character, but this is what Sergio Aragonés has to say about the meeting that I'm just finishing, and the meeting that they had. Okay, they called me and said, Sergio, we need a Western, we need a cowboy called Bad LASH. Think about it. So I did. I thought the character, the way I work, things pop in my head pretty fast. So as I was sitting with them in the restaurant, I was describing how the character was. So Bad LASH was born right there in the restaurant. One of the things they wanted to be different, a different Western, but they didn't know how. So I came up with a guy who had good taste for food and music, and love flowers and nature, and was a crack shot. but he was no clown. The idea when I wrote it was that he was a man with a sense of humor, but he was not a clown. He would do things that will make other people become the butt of humor, but not him. The humor should be the result of Bad Lash's action, right? Okay. So basically, Sergio Aragonés is one of the creators of the character, right? We don't know if he was just the sole creator of the character, right? And we know that like the conversations between Sergio Aragonés and Carmine Infantino and Joe Orlando were kind of frequent, right? And I would say that Bad LASH, from my point of view, is the most Latino of the Western comic heroes, right? He's a womanizer, right? He loves good food. He likes good music, etc., etc., right? So the contribution of Aragonés to the creation of Western comics is basically like the creation of this character, right? Who which has become one of the iconic characters of Western comics in the United States. And basically, we don't have time for more, so thank you very much. And so.